In the headlines, North Korea says it plans to prosecute 2 American detainees while it proposes to end all hostile military activities to South Korea, with some strings attached. The South Korean Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee adopts a resolution denouncing Japan's review of its past apology for the sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. And President Park Geun-hye's approval rating suffers as her office and party need to move fast to win public confidence before by-election next month. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Kang Tae-ri in Seoul. More than 2 months after 2 American nationals were detained in North Korea on separate charges, Pyongyang says it's ready to indict them. Our Connie Kim reports.
North Korea says it's planning to indict 2 U.S. citizens for carrying out what Pyongyang calls hostile acts against the state. The North's official Korean Central News Agency says evidence and testimony confirms previous suspicions about Matthew Todd Miller and Jeffrey Edward Fowle. Miller was arrested in early April after allegedly tearing up a tourist visa upon his arrival in the North and declaring he was seeking asylum. Fowle entered North Korea the same month. State authorities say the 56-year-old man was detained for so-called inconsistent acts, reportedly for leaving a Bible at the hotel where he was staying. Investigations into the 2 men will continue, and a North Korean court is expected to mete out punishments after their respective trials. Miller and Fowle represent the 2nd and 3rd U.S. citizens currently detained in the communist state. Korean-American Kenneth Bae has been in custody since November 2012 and is currently serving a 15-year sentence of hard labor under charges of trying to overthrow the government. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And meanwhile, North Korea sent an offer across the demilitarized zone on this Monday, calling for an end to all cross-border hostilities and slanderous comments. We've heard this before in recent months, and all of them have fallen apart shortly after they were made. But as our Shin Se-min reports, Monday's offer differs from the rest in at least one aspect.
No military provocations from either North or South Korea starting at midnight this Friday, July 4th. That was a proposal made by the North National Defense Commission. Pyongyang's top military body also called on both sides to stop slandering each other. The statement makes specific mention of South Korea's joint military drills with the United States, dubbed the Ulchi Freedom Guardian exercises, scheduled to begin this August, and calls for them to be halted while the 2014 Asian Games are taking place in the South Korean port city of Incheon. The North has previously said it would send athletes to the event, which runs from September 19th to October 4th. And experts say Monday's offer had Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to the South later this week in mind.
With President Xi's visit to Seoul, the North is trying to put the blame on the South for not expressing its will to ameliorate the stalled inter-Korean relationship. Pyongyang is also showing its discontent over the continuous joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington by mentioning the Ulchi Freedom Guardian drills.
Other experts see the North offer as a conciliatory gesture, pointing out that it uses softer language than past offers of the same ilk. They also cited the timing of the proposal as it coincides with the joint communique agreed upon by the North and South on July 4, 1972, which outlined the steps for achieving a peaceful reconciliation. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
10 years ago today, the 2 Koreas began operation of their jointly run Kaesong industrial complex in the North Korean border city. And our Hwang Sung-hee walks us through how far the inter-Korean cooperation project has come in the last 10 years and offers a preview of what we might expect in the next decade.
On June 30th, 2004, 15 South Korean companies began running factories at the North Korean border city of Kaesong. 10 years later, The Kaesong industrial complex has seen significant growth. The number of South Korean businesses has jumped from 15 to 125, and the number of North Korean workers from 6,000 to 52,000. The production volume at the factory zone has increased over 30-fold from $15 million to nearly $470 million at present. But the complex has had its struggles. Last year, North Korea unilaterally suspended operations for 5 months amid escalating inter-Korean tensions. The two Koreas have held 5 rounds of talks to prevent a recurrence of similar incidents, but have failed to make much progress.
The two Koreas do not have a framework for ministerial-level dialogue, and almost all inter-Korean cooperation is at a standstill.
But despite the risks, South Korean businesses find Kaesong Complex attractive. The Kaesong Complex offers cheap labor at a cost of around $150 a month per worker, and goods are transferred over land, which means they can be on the shelves the day they're manufactured.
Small and medium-sized firms in South Korea struggle after 5 years in business, but those in Kaesong are flourishing even after 10 years. The two Koreas have formed an economic community, which we see as a small reunification.
The Kaesong complex is now taking baby steps towards globalization, with around 20 foreign companies showing interest in investing in the joint business park. But concerns about stability are holding the companies back. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
The Foreign Affairs Committee of Korea's National Assembly passed a resolution this morning condemning Japan's recent review of the 1993 Kono Statement, which is basically its apology for its sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. It's just one part of the Korean government's plan to counter Tokyo's claims and lend support to the victims of Japan's sexual enslavement. Our Choi Yoo-sun has more.
Calling Tokyo's review of the 1993 Kono Statement an historical provocation, Korean lawmakers in a resolution adopted on Monday accused Japan of contradicting itself by denying the essence of its past apology. The Abe administration recently claimed that Seoul and Tokyo negotiated the content of the apology after lacking evidence to confirm the Japanese military's wartime sex slaves were forced into prostitution. In the 1993 statement, Japan acknowledged its military was involved in the establishment and management of military brothels and that the coercion of women by private recruiters was done at the request of the military.
The Korean National Assembly makes clear that the Kono Statement was publicized based on the findings of the Japanese government's own investigation and was not the result of Korea and Japan's negotiations.
The Korean lawmakers denounced the Japanese government for damaging the spirit of cooperative ties in Northeast Asia, warning such a provocative act would only serve to isolate Japan from the international community. Lawmakers called on Seoul to search for additional evidence that the Japanese military coerced women from Korea and other Asian countries. Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se at the parliamentary committee meeting vowed to respond firmly to any attempt by Tokyo to distort history.
Beyond Seoul-Tokyo ties, the Korean government will treat the issue from a universal humanitarian perspective and cooperate with the international community to increase pressure on Japan.
Seoul is expected to release a white paper on the so-called comfort women by July of next year, detailing the damage done to victims and exactly how the women were coerced by the Japanese military. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. It's arguably the greatest test of President Park Geun-hye's leadership thus far, with her approval rating suffering since the April ferry disaster and her failure to find a suitable prime minister. This has many wondering whether she has enough time to push through with her envisioned reform drive and help the ruling party improve its chances in some critical by-elections at the end of July. Ji Myung-gil reports.
President Park Geun-hye is racing against time to win back support from voters before a crucial by-election on July 30th, with many political pundits saying her party has a good chance of losing its majority in parliament. An outcome like that would cripple her efforts to push through legislation aimed at spurring economic recovery, overhauling government systems, and stamping out social ills accumulated during a rapid headlong drive toward industrialization over the past several decades. President Park's plan was to give a fresh impetus to her reform drive by shaking up her cabinet, but she ran into problems after her two prime minister nominees withdrew one after another in the face of public criticism over morality and controversial remarks on history. That and the administration's handling of the April ferry disaster have dented the president's approval ratings, which stood near 60% in March, but are hovering around 48%, the lowest since she took office in 2013. With confirmation hearings for new cabinet members taking place at the National Assembly through next week and July's by-elections just around the corner, the president may have to come up with new tactics to regain the people's trust. In what appears to be a step in that direction at the first meeting of her senior secretaries on Monday, President Park asked the political parties to seek ways to improve the confirmation hearing process and said her office will maintain a pool of talented candidates and keep track of their verification records. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
On the economic front, Korea's overseas construction orders hit a record high of $37.5 billion in the first half, up 22% from last year. This puts Korea well on track towards its yearly goal of $70 billion. The figures were given a boost earlier this morning, actually, when Hyundai Engineering and Construction announced it had secured a $4.8 billion bid to expand a refinery in Venezuela. Korea's biggest builder entered the continent just 4 years ago and started making inroads into the country 2 years ago. Korea's leading mobile messaging app, KakaoTalk, has risen to number 3 in brand value, backed by a market share of over 90% in this country. KakaoTalk garnered over 915 points out of 1,000 in the second quarter on local market researcher Brand Stocks Index, putting it in the third among the 100 brands surveyed. KakaoTalk's brand competitiveness is expected to strengthen even further after a merger with Daum Communications, the country's second largest internet portal. Smokers have it good here in Korea. Cigarette prices are the lowest among OECD countries and haven't changed for 10 years. As the smoking rate has been the second highest last year, the Korean government tries to tackle this issue with plans of raising tobacco prices. Kwon Soo-ah tells us more.
Just last week, Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare released a shocking anti-smoking advertisement in the hope it would convince smokers to kick their habit. At a recent symposium held on World No Tobacco Day, the ministry said it will actively push ahead with the World Health Organization's recommendation to raise cigarette prices to bring down the country's high smoking rate. In Korea, you pay 2,500 won, or roughly $2.50 for a pack of 20 cigarettes. That's the cheapest out of the 41 OECD nations. A pack of cigarettes is more than 6 times more expensive in Norway than it is in Korea. Experts say the relation between the price of tobacco and quitting cannot be ignored.
In 2004, the tax increased 500 won per pack, and it resulted that cigarette sales decreased 27% in 2005, just 1 year.
I don't think I will quit smoking if the prices rise a little bit, but I might if they double.
I used to smoke. I think the smoking rate would only drop with price hikes to $3 or $4 a pack, since people would be burdened.
But there's a reason why the government has failed on a number of occasions to push through with a raise. There are concerns people in the low-income bracket will be hit hardest, since a cigarette price hike also means a tax hike. Tobacco tax is also paid indirectly, meaning the tax is not collected by the government, but by tobacco companies.
Based on the scientific evidence, tax increase is one of the best buys for tobacco control policies.
That's why experts say the increased tax revenue from cigarette sales must be used to develop more efficient anti-smoking and smoking cessation programs. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Now let's get you updated on the 2014 Brazil World Cup action, starting off with the Netherlands taking on Mexico. It did start rather slow, but Giovanni Dos Santos scored the first goal of the match, giving Mexico 1-0 lead. But Mexico found the back of the net for the equalizer in the 88th minute. The match looked like it was going into extra time, but a penalty is called in the dying seconds of the match, and Huntelaar scores the game winner, helping the Netherlands advance to the quarterfinals with a 2-1 win. And with Greece taking on Costa Rica, scoreless first half, but Brian Ruiz, that is, at the 52nd minute, gives Costa Rica the 1-0 lead, but another last-minute equalizer there. And as the match goes into a penalty shootout, Costa Rica goes perfect on the spot kick, beating the Greek side 5-3 to advance to the next round. Korea's national football players arrived back to Korea earlier this Monday morning after finishing bottom of Group H. Head coach Hong Myung-wo, who blamed himself for the poor showing in the team's final loss of the tournament to Belgium, apologized in front of the Korean press and remained uncommitted about his own future.
We received a lot of support from the people, and I feel sorry for not being able to fulfill their expectations. In regards to my future plans, I'm not in a place to comment on it right now, but I know I'll make a good decision.
And midfielder Son Heung-min admitted that the team was not ready for the World Cup, while team captain Koo Ja-cheol was more optimistic, saying that they gained valuable experience this time around and that they have to show something 4 years down the road.
I am devastated, and as a member of this team, I feel responsible for the poor result at the World Cup.
And for a preview, Algeria plays Germany to avenge one of its most heartbreaking defeats on the football pitch. It was eliminated from the 1982 finals in controversial fashion after West Germany beat Austria 1-0 in the final group game, a result that sent West Germany through and left Algeria to pack their bags. And Nigeria is also facing off against France in the day's other round of 16 match. Israeli forces have launched an attack on militant targets in the Gaza Strip, killing a Hamas gunman and injuring 2 others. For more on this story, Paul is joining us from the news center. Paul, what prompted this latest attack?
Well, the Israeli military says these men were targeted because they were about to fire rockets across the border. Officials say militants have fired at least 62 rockets at Israel this month alone. The Hamas gunman you just mentioned was killed in a series of Israeli airstrikes on Sunday that hit 12 locations in Gaza, which the military describes as terror activity sites where weapons were being manufactured. The airstrikes were in retaliation for 6 rockets that reportedly struck Israel a day before, which reportedly came from Palestinian territory. Earlier on Sunday, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for peace between the two sides.
While our shared vision of peace between Israelis and Palestinians is yet to materialize, particularly these days we are very much concerned by not being able to see Middle East peace process moving on. But still you have been remaining as a constant optimist and visionary in the Middle East peace process.
Ban made the remarks while holding talks with Israeli President Shimon Peres at the UN headquarters in New York.
And Paul, staying in the Middle East, Egypt is marking the first anniversary since the ousting of President Mohamed Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood from power. Millions took to the streets this time last year. What's the current state of the country?
Egypt remains fiercely divided, with state media praising the military and police for their crackdown on so-called terrorists, while the Muslim Brotherhood, once the country's most powerful political force, has gone underground. The June 30th revolution ended in a coup and the election of former military general Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as president this year. Clashes between the Brotherhood and the government have left hundreds of people dead, and experts are concerned about another violent uprising.
It's difficult to uproot the Muslim Brotherhood because it has been around for 86 years and has deep grassroots in Egyptian society. It is a wide organization that we believe is still alive and kicking. There are protests that take place on Fridays, and even though the numbers are small, they indicate that the organization is still present across Egypt.
Over the past year, Egypt has not only received international criticism over its crackdown against the Islamic supporters, but also for restrictions imposed on freedoms of the press and expression.
And turning now to Japan, a man set himself on fire at a train station in downtown Tokyo in an apparent protest against the Japanese government's push to reinterpret its pacifist constitution. It looks like this incident has sparked some intense outrage.
That's right. Public protests in Japan and around the world erupted as the news spread of the horrific immolation of the protester in the Japanese capital. Local city councilors and residents rallied in the streets, calling on the government to stop attempts to lift the ban on collective self-defense, a move they say goes against the people's wish for a peaceful nation.
In the 69 years since World War II, Japan has never shot a bullet at any country. On this occasion, I cannot understand why the government is suddenly talking about the right of collective self-defense instead of self-defense.
The protests at home and abroad are expected to continue as the submission date for a cabinet resolution on lifting the ban on collective self-defense fast approaches.
And finally, Facebook is in hot water after conducting a massive research project on its users without their consent. How many people are we talking about?
Nearly 700,000 user accounts were involved in the psychological study that manipulated news feeds in an attempt to control their emotional responses. Among those who have been voicing outrage include Kate Crawford, a professor at the MIT Center for Civic Media, who tweeted that the Facebook experiment was a symptom of a much wider failure about ethics and power. The research was carried out by Cornell University and the University of California at San Francisco for 1 week in 2012. In their final paper, published in the American National Academy of Sciences, the researchers apologized while Facebook defended its actions, saying it cared deeply about its users.
Yes.
Chetty?
All right. Thank you very much. You go to Twitter, of course, to file a complaint about Facebook, right? It just makes sense that way. Anyways, thank you very much, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. And it's time now to check on weather conditions. And of course, our Kim Bo-kyung is joining us from the Weather Center for an update. Bo-kyung, it was a hot day here in Seoul, but different stories for other regions, I hear.
That's right. That's because parts of the inland regions are seeing showers, thunder, and even hail from time to time. Well, at the moment, we are at the edge of a high-pressure system from the East Sea, which is leading to partly cloudy skies. Those of you in the inland regions can expect another 5 to 20 millimeters of precipitation through later tonight, and tomorrow is shaping up to be even hotter than today, with UV levels expected to soar to the very high range in most places. Plus, the discomfort index also looks to be on the rise, so let's try to take things easy by drinking a cold cup of coffee or taking a break from time to time. While on Tuesday, Seoul hits 31, while Daegu also reaches 31. On to other places. Daejeon hits 30 degrees, while Jeju, Dokdo, and Mount Kumgang make it to the mid-20s. Last but not least, ending off with World Cup weather, the average daytime high over in Brazil should reach the mid-20s with a mix of misty and sunny conditions. That'll do it for now, and I'll be back with more after 10.
And that will do it for this Monday edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.